Huh. Can't hear anything. I need to find it. Sound here.
Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to tonight's public hearing. My name is Frank Cassidy. I'm the acting zoning examiner for the city of Tucson. We have one case scheduled for public hearing tonight. It's the remand from City Council of case C9-2120, Casita Village at La Mariposa, Houghton Road, SR to R2. We're going to have a lot of people participating in tonight's public hearing. So to avoid unnecessary noise and interruptions, please mute your microphone except when you're speaking. As zoning examiner, I conduct rezoning hearings on behalf of the mayor and council and make findings of fact, which I put into a written report along with my recommendation, which I send to the mayor and council for their consideration and for their final decision. My report will be based on the information submitted to me, which includes the rezoning application, staff report, all the written materials, the approvals and protests, all the correspondence, and the testimony given at tonight's public hearing. I will also include in the record all documents submitted to me up to the close of the public hearing.
Right.
Because this is a remand of a rezoning that was the subject of two prior zoning examiner hearings, the reports and records of those hearings are also part of the record in this case. Before we begin, I'd like to put on the record that I was the deputy Pima County attorney who was the lead counsel about 35 years ago for the acquisition of public road right-of-way for Houghton Road between Speedway Boulevard and Tanque Verde Road, including the roadway right-of-way immediately adjacent to the property that's the subject of this zoning case. Floodplain issues were a key component of the eminent domain proceedings and the associated jury trials. I disclosed this personal history of mine to the city attorney in mid-December, and we both agreed that I have no conflict of interest that would keep me from acting as zoning examiner in this case. We decided that I should place this information on the record as part of my introduction tonight in the interest of transparency, and so that's what I've just done. Tonight's proceedings are being recorded. When I call on you to testify, please speak clearly and begin your testimony by stating your name and your address. The process after tonight's hearing goes kind of like this. Well, it goes precisely like this. I will complete a preliminary report within 5 working days after the public hearing is closed. I will then prepare a final report, which will be issued 2 weeks after the public hearing is closed. If you'd like to receive a copy of the preliminary report and you're not listed as a party on the case, you may send an email to tucsonrezoning@tucsonaz.gov or call the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services Department. A copy of the final report will also be available from the Planning and Development Services Department. I will send the final report to the mayor and council. At the scheduled public hearing on this case, the mayor and council will then vote on the matter based on my recommendation along with other factors. Now, here's how tonight's hearing is going to proceed. First, a Planning and Development Services representative will give a brief presentation of the case. I will then ask the applicant if he or she wishes to make a statement or give testimony. After the applicant's presentation, I'll call on those who asked in advance to speak to come forward and make their presentations. After the registered speakers, I'll open it up to anyone else in the audience who would like to be heard. After all the public testimony, I will then offer the applicant the opportunity to address any points that have been raised and to give a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing. With all of that out of the way, I will now ask John Beal of the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services to begin by presenting a brief staff report.
Cassidy, this again is, like you mentioned, is a remand case of C9-2120. At the Mayor and Council regular meeting of December 10th, 2024, it was moved by Councilmember Cunningham and then duly seconded and carried out by a vote of 6-0 to remand this item back to the zoning examiner for a new public hearing as recommended by the city attorney. Given the significant revisions to the proposal that have occurred since the time of the zoning examiner's public hearing in January 2022, as reflected in the revised PDP as submitted by the applicant in November 2024, and given additional conditions now recommended by PDSD based on staff review of the FEMA Conditional Letter of Map Revision, the CLOMR, by both Pima County Flood Control District and City of Tucson Floodplain Administrator, the city attorney recommends that the mayor and council remand this matter to the zoning examiner for a new public hearing to review these modifications and suggested conditions. And then as of today's date, the remand approval protest, there have been 4 approvals and 209 protests. Staff has also received a letter of protest from the Coalition of the Sonoran Desert Protection Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beal. Does the applicant wish to make a presentation at this time?
Good evening, Mr. Cassidy. This is Lexi Wellett from the Planning Center. Yes, we would like to make a presentation as quite a bit of time has passed, and we just want to fill you in on the history of this project and where we've gone. So I do have a brief presentation. I'm going to share my screen. If you could let me know when that comes through on your end, that would be much appreciated.
We can see that.
Okay, I think I shared the wrong one. 1 second. There we go. Does that come through?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. And again, thank you, Mr. Cassidy. As I mentioned, my name is Lexi Wellett, and I am with a firm called the Planning Center. I'm also joined this evening by Linda Morales, the CEO of the Planning Center. She is online, as well as Ryan Stuckey from CEC, as well as Avi Buckles from Westland Resources, who has been our archaeologist and biologist on the property, as well as the developers, Philip Amos and Philip Aries, who we've been working extensively with to analyze this project. And I wanted to start briefly by taking the time to thank Councilmember Cunningham's office and the Ward 2 staff, as well as the neighborhood representatives for the continued dialogue over the last 3.5 years or so that we've been working on this project. And I also wanted to set the stage of this, that we have gone, as you are aware, Mr. Cassidy, we've gone through the zoning examiner process in 2 previous public hearings. And at the conclusion of the last public hearing, the zoning examiner did recommend approval subject to additional conditions, where at this point in time, we have generally satisfied much of those conditions that were passed. So this hearing for us is a courtesy hearing for the city to review the modifications that have happened and fill everyone in on what we have done since the last zoning examiner hearing back in January of 2022. So with that, I'll go ahead and keep my remarks brief, but if at any point, Mr. Cassidy, there is a question, please feel free to stop me, and our team is more than happy to answer that. But to dive into our project, as you are aware, the property that we're looking to rezone is about a 20-acre site that is comprised of a much larger parcel that's about 36 acres in size. And this property is located on the west side of Houghton Road, about 1/2 mile from Tanque Verde Road and 1/2 mile from Speedway. So right in the middle, and we're surrounded by a variety of uses, whether that's La Mariposa Resort to the southeast of us, single family residential directly south, the Agua Caliente Wash in Pima County flood control parcels, and then a number of subdivisions just beyond that. The property, as you are, I'm sure, aware, is within the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. And this neighborhood plan designates this property as a medium-density residential site. And in the plan, medium-density residential is defined as 6 residential units to the acre at the minimum side, with a maximum of 16 dwelling units to the acre. And as a point of contention and where we want to highlight, and I think a lot of the discussion is this asterisk under the red highlighted text here that suggests land uses proposed within this space are contingent upon satisfactory solutions to the existing flood problems in the neighborhood. Or in other words, as stated in the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, upon further detailed hydraulic studies that determine the characteristics and extent of the flood hazard and recommend appropriate solutions and flood control strategies that the city engineer or floodplain administrator in this case and Pima County Flood Control District are in concurrence with. So with that, setting that stage, I'm going to get into more generally how we conform with this policy and what we've done to satisfy that, but just wanted to start with the matter of fact of what this property is designated as in the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. Now jumping over to the zoning of the site to evaluate the existing zoning. The site that is contemplated to develop as Casita Village at La Mariposa is currently zoned SR, RX1, and O3. And relative to establishing the housing options that are desired both by Plan Tucson and the Bear Canyon neighborhood, and like that proposed within this project, what this zoning would lend for is approximately 9 single-family lots on the northern side of Porta Vista La Mariposa that would be able to disturb much of the property, with the southern side of the road where the O3 land use is designated would consist of approximately 110 to 150 multi-story garden-style apartments that could develop up to 40 feet in height, which is not conducive to preserving the overall character of the neighborhood as it predominantly contains single-story structures. So to circle back why we are here before you this evening is we are requesting to rezone approximately 20 acres from SR to R2 to develop a multifamily residential community known as Casita Village at La Mariposa, which features a single-story rental product that is clustered approximately 350 feet away from the southern banks of the Agua Caliente Wash and features an amenity area for residents, parking, green infrastructure and drainage basins, landscaping, and approximately 32% of natural open space, again, to facilitate wildlife habitat and manage the wash respectively. Before I go over, this is the revised site plan, but before I dived into the details of this site plan, I really wanted to walk you through where we started in this process. So recognizing the existing characteristics of the site and the goals and implementation techniques stipulated within the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, we began this project in 2021 by performing an analysis that evaluated the characteristics of the floodplain and the extent of flood hazards, as well as the extent of the protected riparian habitat on site to determine acceptable limits for disturbance. Through those analysis, which can be explained in greater detail at any point if you would like, our team came to the conclusion that the area outlined in the thick black dashed line on the screen would be suitable for development without impacting properties up or downstream from the site. Once we established the allowable encroachment limits, our team then submitted this analysis to the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services Department for an evaluation by way of a floodplain use permit. The application was accepted and approved by Planning and Development Services, and a floodplain use permit was issued. The issuance of a floodplain use permit ultimately indicated that further detailed hydraulic analysis had been performed, the severity of flood hazard had been determined, and that further study of appropriate flood control measures was appropriate. It should be noted that at this point in the process, i.e. the rezoning process, this type of an analysis does not occur. Typically, it's a very preliminary level where you analyze the floodplain, offer generalized recommendations for how flooding or drainage would be handled, and that is further analyzed at the time of development through the development plan process. So this analysis that we did prior to submitting or even developing a site plan really demonstrated an extensive analysis on that floodplain. So that leads us to the first iteration of the preliminary development plan that we created. And based on the analysis that we did early on, we came up with this plan that you see before you that features approximately 132 single-story casita units within the rezoning area, and we're proposing a total of 179 in the space that is currently zoned O3, excuse me. And the overall density for this project would be 6.6 units per acre, which again is at the low end of the medium density threshold of as stipulated by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. Upon crafting this site plan that's before you, our team attended a pre-application meeting with City of Tucson Planning and Development Services, and they suggested that our project was appropriate to go through the process. In July of 2021, we held a neighborhood meeting to discuss the project with the neighbors. And at this meeting, the primary concerns expressed was compliance with the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan and the densities suggested, existing flooding and drainage concerns in the surrounding area, and traffic both on Bonanza Avenue and Houghton Road. So as part of our application preparation, which was initially submitted in September of 2021, our team prepared an in-depth site analysis and design compatibility report that is a part of your package that analyzed the impacts of the proposed development and the pre and post conditions. A traffic impact analysis was conducted as part of these original efforts by EPS Group, Inc., and they concluded that Houghton Road has adequate capacity to carry the 1,300 daily trips anticipated to be generated by the development, and the intersection of Houghton Road and Corte Vista La Mariposa will operate at an acceptable level of service. As part of the development plan process, moving forward, should the rezoning be accepted, this TIA that was previously prepared will be updated to ensure that the most recent conditions are considered. And if at that time, improvements are recommended to Houghton Road or Corte Vista La Mariposa to support the development of Casita Village at La Mariposa, the developer will be required to pay for and install those improvements. Upon submitting our application, it was found complete and reviewed by the necessary city departments, including Planning and Development Services, Department of Transportation and Mobility, Tucson Water, and Tucson Fire, as well as a number of outside agencies, including Pima County Flood Control District and Pima County Regional Wastewater Department. Each department that reviewed the application had no objection to the request, with the inclusion of the rezoning conditions, that's numbers 1 through 13 as outlined in the report, and the case was set forth for public hearing before the zoning examiner. In December of 2021, we held a public hearing before the zoning examiner, in which he concluded at that time that the proposed zoning request did not comply with Plan Tucson or the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. In disagreement with his original findings, our team requested a reconsideration hearing, which was granted by the zoning examiner based on additional information that we submitted. In January 2022, the reconsideration public hearing was held in which the zoning examiner, sorry, I missed a slide there, but in which the zoning examiner suggested that the project was in compliance with Plan Tucson and the Bear Canyon neighborhood plans, subject to the 13 conditions that had previously been included by staff, as well as the inclusion of 3 additional conditions. Those 3 conditions are presented before you on the screen, and they more or less suggest that we shall conduct further hydraulic studies prior to the submission of a development plan. And that we shall apply for that conditional letter of map revisions with FEMA. It also suggests that we shall notify the neighborhood association and any property owner within 400 feet, 30 days prior to that, and that is a stipulation required within the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan. And then he also recommended that we shall offer to review the CLOMR submitted to FEMA and the proposed development with neighbors and affected neighborhood associations. He also added that we will work with the owner of La Mariposa Resort to close the access on Bonanza Road, and that we will work with neighboring property owners to determine whether speed bumps would be appropriate on Bonanza Avenue. And if so, we would be on the hook of funding the construction of those. Again, as I mentioned early on in this presentation, much of those conditions have been satisfied in some capacity or another, and I'll continue to express those as we move forward here. Shortly after the zoning examiner made his recommendation in late January, early February, our team here took it upon ourselves to really address some of the traffic concerns that the neighborhood had expressed, particularly that on Bonanza Avenue. And so the developers of this development have paid for the gate on Bonanza to be closed, and that gate has been closed since February of 2022. And it has been expressed through this process that neighbors who live within Forest Grove have felt that they have gotten their neighborhood back because of the change in traffic pattern as a result of that gate. And so as part of our negotiations, we have been successful in negotiating with the owner that should the rezoning be approved, that gate on Bonanza Avenue will be permanently closed. And that's all efforts that have come directly as a result of the rezoning here and the developers working with the property owner there. Unfortunately, as Bonanza is La Mariposa Resort's legal access, that gate will be reopened if at the discretion of the resort owner, should the rezoning not be approved there. The next part I wanted to walk you through is basically what we were working towards going to mayor and council for the ultimate adoption or a vote of this rezoning back in April of 2022. And prior to going to the mayor and council, our team met with a variety of neighbors and Councilmember Cunningham and his staff in the Ward 2 office to discuss the proposed rezoning. And at this meeting, it was requested by the neighbors and Councilmember Cunningham that our team put our application on hold to further refine our encroachment analysis utilizing newly phoned topography information, among other considerations, and to obtain a conditional letter of map revision from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Our team agreed and began preparing and refining our analysis. As part of the refined model used for the encroachment analysis and ultimately our CLOMR application, CEC collected new topography data for the Agua Caliente wash from approximately 1 mile upstream and 1 mile downstream. And what that new topographic data revealed was that due to the changes in topography as a result of scour or sediment, that the flow elevation and flow depth within the Agua Caliente floodplain had increased in some places and decreased in others, and that was not a result of the proposed encroachment. So in other words, while the topography data used for the initial encroachment analysis was proven to be outdated as the neighborhood had suggested, the new data and the refined analysis demonstrated a similar outcome and indicated that no additional properties would be added to the floodplain based on the new mapping and modeling and the proposed encroachment within the floodplain. And at that time, the neighborhood had requested that the developer hire a third-party reviewer to analyze the encroachment analysis. So utilizing the consultant recommended by the neighborhood, J.E. Fuller, the developer hired and consulted them to evaluate our encroachment analysis. After a series of back and forths and further refinements to the 2D hydraulic model based on feedback we received during the third-party review, it was verified that the floodplain encroachment analysis and the proposed limits of a disturbance were acceptable and would not adversely impact adjacent properties. So utilizing the information that we collected through that refined analysis, our team began preparing in March of 2023 the Clomer application, utilizing all of our refined material and in coordination with the City of Tucson floodplain administrator. And we formally submitted that application to FEMA in June of 2023. After about 9 months to a year of review and back and forth with FEMA, they issued an approved Clomer in May of 2024. Shortly after that, in June, our team hosted a neighborhood meeting at the Ward 2 office to discuss FEMA's findings with the neighborhood and the next steps, again, satisfying one of the conditions stipulated by the zoning examiner previously. At this meeting, similar concerns related to the drainage and our analysis were discussed, as well as traffic was mentioned. So that brings us to where we are today. The revised PDP. Since receiving FEMA's approval, our team has been working very closely with Councilmember Cunningham, the City of Tucson Floodplain Administrator, and Pima County Flood Control District to devise a floodplain mitigation strategy that provides a satisfactory solution to the existing flood problems in the area. The strategy we devised, and ultimately that the city floodplain administrator and Pima County Flood Control District both have concurred with by virtue of the issuance of their conditions. We've modified our PDP, which again is why we are back before you this evening, and the case was remanded. So to run through really briefly what it is that we have done to modify this site plan is that we've gone and looked to really address the floodplain situation here, and we have since removed all of the units from the established AE zone and have identified that a portion of the site will need to be raised to accommodate future homes above the 100-year flood elevation. This raise will be done in accordance with the City of Tucson floodplain application or floodplain ordinance, and will be less than 1 foot or 1/10 of a foot, and will not increase the velocity or flow in the wash by more than 1 second per 1 foot per second. No work will occur in the floodplain, and all erosion hazard prevention measures will be designed in accordance with the City of Tucson standards. As a result of removing all of the units from the AE zone floodway, our overall unit count has reduced by 11 units within the rezoning area for a proposal of 121 units. and a collective total within the development of 162 overall units. Additionally, the overall density account for the proposed rezoning area is less now at just over six units there. Additionally, the PDP has been revised to incorporate additional drainage basins on the west side of the property to accommodate 120% of the detention and retention that is, to accommodate 120% of the water coming across this site in the existing condition. This is 20% beyond the requirements established by the city's current requirements. Additionally, we've heard through this process that the neighborhood has been working with Councilmember Cunningham to establish an equine district. And so what we've gone ahead and done, we've incorporated a number of design elements to further that, one of which is we've agreed to the possibility of establishing a future trail within the rezoning boundary. We've also incorporated a variety of view fencing that I'll get to here in a second. And then the other items that came as a result of the further analysis was adjusted boundaries to reflect surveyed information, as well as increasing perimeter yard setbacks along Houghton Road and Porta Vista La Mariposa to accommodate additional green infrastructure and drainage features, and to maintain the current aesthetic of the property as seen from Houghton Road. To give a little bit of perspective, the nearest casita unit along Houghton Road is approximately 200 feet away from the edge of the pavement. So there is quite a bit of space in between, and much of that property will remain as natural, undisturbed open space. And certainly the first 30 feet of our property, as it is required to do so per the scenic corridor overlay. And so we will be managing that consistently with what's required. And lastly, the proposed reconfiguration still maintains well over 6 acres of open space and protected habitat within the rezoning area. So in conclusion, Mr. Zoning Examiner, our team here believes that we have done everything that we can to demonstrate that our proposed development will not adversely impact, and we've gotten concurrence with the flood with FEMA, the floodplain administrator, as well as the Pima County Flood Control District, and we respectfully request that you recommend this rezoning for approval to the mayor and council. So with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Willett. A couple of questions. I'm sure you've seen the recommended conditions, the new conditions now 17 and 18. Are you in agreement with those new proposed conditions?
Yes, Mr. Zoning Examiner, we are.
I also wanted to ask you about a couple of the pre-existing zoning conditions. You know, I obviously wasn't the zoning examiner previously, so you may have answered this already, but I wanted to make sure that your client accepts conditions 9 and 11. 9 is the one that requires your client to provide a 50-foot trail easement to the northwest quadrant of the property for Agua Caliente Wash Trail number 1. Is that acceptable to your client?
Yes, Mr.
Now, is that in addition to the equine trail you were talking about just a moment ago?
No, as I understand it, that easement is intended to serve both functions there.
Okay. And then the other question was about number 11. condition 11, which requires that the property that remains in a special flood hazard area after development shall be dedicated in fee simple to the Pima County Regional Flood Control District. Does your client accept that condition as well?
Yes, Mr. Cassidy, our client does accept that condition.
All right, very good. I appreciate that. We'll now turn to those who have requested to speak and hear from them. And we've received several requests. Probably the largest number pertain to the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association representatives. But before I get to them, I'm going to opt to call first on Katie Houghton of the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection, if Katie is here, to present first. Katie, if you're here, please unmute.
Apologies for the delay there. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kate Houghton. I reside at 9063 East Holmes Street in the city of Tucson. I am the co-executive director for the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection, which I am here on behalf of this evening, and I'm authorized to speak for. So as per our comment letter, we are concerned that policies in the city of Tucson's general plan that relate to the conservation land system and rezoning were not adequately addressed in this rezoning review. Specifically, LT 21 and Plan Tucson states that the city of Tucson will, and I quote, consider the application of the conservation land system, designation and requirements in rezoning reviews, end quote. Now, we can't see any reference to such consideration, including in the zoning examiner's reports or staff reports. And this is relevant as the land in the rezoning request is entirely within Pima County's conservation land system area. It's also entirely categorized as important riparian area. Important riparian areas were designated based on their high water availability, vegetation density, and biological productivity. This designation, as well as the purchase of land immediately adjacent to these parcels by Pima County Regional Flood Control District, which they purchased to protect as preserves, these are strong indicators to us of the value of the Agua Caliente wash, which I don't think you'd disagree with. So the rezoning's revised preliminary development plan, which we just saw on screen there, includes 32.5% open space. We are glad to see open space set aside. However, the conservation land system would require 95% open space to be set aside for rezonings on land of this biological value. So you can do the math. That's over a 60% shortcoming for this rezoning. Given the significant gap in our concerns regarding compliance with Plan Tucson, specifically policy LT 21, the Coalition for Sonoran Desert Protection cannot support this rezoning. We are, however, available to discuss how to best consider LT 21 in relation to this project. Thank you for your time.
You know, in looking at your materials, Ms. Houghton, it looks like really your preference would be for it to be primarily open space, but the current zoning does allow, obviously, for suburban ranch homes, which would cause there to be potentially less open space. What is your response to that? Is that a concern to your group?
We absolutely support that there would be some development on this land, as you say, considering the zoning. That said, we'd like to see something closer to an agreement that does respect and honor the conservation land system and that 95% open space set aside. So that 60% shortcoming that we mentioned is a little too stark, I think, for our taste to still comply with what the letter of the law that we see in Plan Tucson. And I'll also mention LT 20 on top of LT 21. LT 20 outlines that future annexed lands would comply with the conservation land system. Now we know this was a previously annexed land, but again, you can see that City of Tucson intends to honor the conservation land system.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments. I'd like next to turn to the Bear Canyon group. I know that President Tom Adang had submitted a request that basically his group would submit sort of as a team, and he had a list in his request to speak, and I'm certainly open to following that list. I've written it down, and we can follow that. I did notice, though, that in your materials, Mr. Adang, that you mentioned that Dr. Harry Candle also wanted to speak. So I wasn't sure where you wanted to put his presentation, but at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to begin your presentation, and you can let me know where you'd like Dr. Candle to be inserted.
Yes, sir. Good evening. I am Tom Adang, and I will make my statement actually at the toward the end. We have three groups. I have here Mr. Vaughn Matur is actually is housebound from surgery, so he will not be speaking. I'm going to first ask Mr. Dennis Karsh to come up and speak, then Mr. Rolly Hoke, then John Lockwood, then Jane Rojas, Mark Weigel, Heidi Schul, and then I will speak. After that, Peggy Carson is the last speaker for us, but she is home, she is on, and so we'll ask to go there. And then after that, then Dr. Kendall will be available. So that's kind of the order that I would like to do it. So I'll bring Dennis up now. Thank you for your assistance in getting this all done. Thank you.
Certainly.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Karsh, and I reside with my wife Kathy at 9877 East Forest Grove Loop in Tucson. I am the current president of the Forest Grove Loop HOA, a group of 20 homes immediately off Bonanza. On August 2nd, 2021, my wife and I had a firsthand experience with flooding in that region on Bonanza, as reported by 3 Tucson news stations. At 8 p.m., we were in the backseat of a hired car on the way home from the airport. It was pitch dark and in a driving rain. We turned left off Tanque Verde Road onto Bonanza and warned the driver to stop immediately if he saw water on the road, as we have access over the wash via the Powderhorn development and gates. We didn't realize that his visibility was severely limited, as the windshield wipers and headlights were ineffective against the rain. In the back seat, we were looking for the flood warning sign that announces the approach of the wash, as well as a sawhorse and flasher that's always in place during the monsoon season, as the sign is often obscured by vegetation in the summer. Unbeknownst to us, we would never see the sawhorse and flasher because it had already been washed away by the floodwaters. The driver crept slowly forward, trying to detect water on the road, when he suddenly shouted that the car was floating. The driver immediately called his boss, who had the sense to call 911. The car circled in the rapid current, and in a matter of seconds, we were heading backwards into the Bonanza Wash. We crashed into a tree near the entrance into the wash, at which point the terrified driver opened his window and scrambled through the window into the upper branches of the tree. With the loss of the driver's weight and his push-off, the car broke free from the tree, with my wife and myself in the back seat of the car. We headed down the wash at a high rate of speed, and the car began taking in water, which ultimately reached the level of the seats. We were unable to open the back seat windows because the child locks were on. We realized that the open window represented our only avenue for potential escape, so we crawled into the front seat. And at that point, the force of the current carried the car into an eddy, where it struck a partially downed tree and drove up the trunk, stopping its progress.
The car now had water at least as high as the back seat, and we got out through the driver's window, holding branches and pulling along the tree to move through the water, and were eventually able to climb up the narrow bank between the Bonanza Wash and one of the lakes at Castle Rock. As we stood on the bank, we could see the lights of the rescue crews on Bonanza and also the flashlights of two teenagers from Castle Rock who had come out to see what was happening. The four of us walked around the lake to Bonanza, where we were met by the fire and ambulance crews. The fire crew had already rescued the driver from the tree, and a fireman had told us that the driver had said there were two people still in the car who had probably drowned. The extent of the flooding on August 2nd was considerably greater than anything we had seen in the Bonanza Wash before, and we had thought at the time it would be a very rare occurrence, unlikely to happen again. But unfortunately, a week or so later, another long-term resident of Bonanza had a similar experience with recurrent flooding in the same location. Our concern is that the next time this happens, if there are small children in the car, or perhaps someone our age with mobility or cognitive issues, the outcome is likely to be considerably worse. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry to hear about your experience, and I appreciate you reporting it. I believe Mr. Hoke may be next.
Good evening, Mr. Cassidy. My name is Rolly Hope. My wife, Joan, and I have lived at 10090 East Powderhorn Place since 1981. We live immediately across the Agua Caliente Wash from La Mariposa. Our property was devastated in 1983 from that flood, as was the Mariposa property. The upstream channelizing of the wash following the flood of 1983 has now concentrated the flow to our area, resulting in actual increase in flood incidents from much less rain than we saw in 1983. Our property has been also damaged by flood waters overflowing the banks of the Agua Caliente 5 more times. The last one was 2023. Following the 1983 flood, I was among neighboring residents who met with Pima County flood personnel and created the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, which was a set of rules for the future development of our northeast part of Pima County, stressing that such development must recognize and preserve the existing rural characteristics of our area. The Board of Supervisors accepted the terms of our plan. Included in the plan is a specific section that sets out the very area that is now being attempting to be rezoned. And it stated, and I quote, "This land is in an indeterminate state due to flooding, and that no increase in density nor any rezoning of this land shall be permitted until a detailed hydrologic study is performed and until the flooding issues of the area have been resolved." The hydrology report mentioned was intended to be prepared by Pima County Flood District, not by somebody hired by the developer. In 1984, the city of Tucson completed its annexation of our neighborhood and specifically acknowledged and accepted that the Bear Canyon Plan and its terms were going forward as part of its obligation. I'm a retired member of the Arizona Bar Association, and I was general counsel of Tucson Electric Power Company. It's my legal opinion that our neighbors and the county officials created a contract when we signed off on the plan, and the city acknowledged and accepted the terms of the plan as a contract when we were annexed. In the case at hand, it appears that some city planners have attempted to circumvent the wording of the regulations by changing the wording. This is not how contracts work. The contract was between the county, city, and the neighbor citizen voters. At any change of language should involve at least the neighbors being advised of a proposed change that may delete vital protections we bargained for. The unilateral change of language, in my opinion, is a taking without compensation. In closing, sir, I'd like to quote a public pronouncement made by our city councilman, Paul Cunningham, in September of 2022, when he denied a rezoning application on property 1/2 mile from this Mariposa property. Mr. Cunningham stated, quote, "I won't be supporting any development that violates the spirit of agreement made at the time of annexation without the agreement of the neighbors. This is about keeping the city's promise to the community and showing that our annexation promises are worth more than the paper the ordinances are printed on," end quote. Mr. Cassidy, I respectfully request that our contract with the city be honored and that this rezoning application be denied.
Thank you, Mr. Hope. Before you leave, so the precise way in which you believe that it is not being carried out has to do with the fact then that the developers representative, the developers floodplain experts have done the work and not the city's experts?
No, I wasn't pointing the finger at who did what. All I know is that the flooding issues in our area have not been resolved. And it's interesting that this thing has been going on for almost 40 years. In 1995, you might see in the record, there was a meeting scheduled like this, except it was a live one with everybody in the same room. 1995, the developers of that project came forth and said, this is not a flood-prone property. The reality, unfortunately, was we were being flooded. We had pictures from the very day of water 2 feet high going over the property. So we have a lot of stories here, but we who live there know that the property is highly flood prone, more so than it was because there's aggregation. The sand has filled up the wash quite a bit. So I'm not a hydrologist. I just, I'm a guy who doesn't want to be washed down the drain again. Because they're talking about building a 3 or 4 foot buildup of land and then a 3 foot they call it armored wall on top of it to block all of the water. Well, if they block that much water, it's got to be coming back at us. And their representation that it won't impact us by more than the 1/10 of a foot requirement of the Tucson plan and of FEMA, it doesn't square with the facts, in my opinion.
So you basically disagree with the Clomer conclusions then?
Absolutely, I do, sir. And thank you. Any other questions, sir?
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Hope. I believe the next speaker, go ahead. John Lockwood, is it?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Cassidy. My name is John Lockwood. I reside at 9859 East Forest Grove Loop, which is located off Bonanza Avenue. I'm also the Vice President of the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association. I'll start off with a summary of my opposition. The rezoning of a part of the Agua Caliente floodplain and the proposed development known as the Casita Village at La Mariposa will increase the risk of flooding. Okay, you've got it up.
Yeah, but I don't have it for them yet.
Sure.
Full screen is at the bottom.
It's not coming.
It's okay. I'm able to see.
I know
I'm
you guys
able to see it.
We can see it.
We're good.
We're good. We're happy.
Okay, do you want me to start from the beginning? So I have sent quite a bit of this information with my opposition form, but I'd like to start off by saying that the rezoning of part of this floodplain will increase the risk of flooding and the likelihood of further associated life safety incidents that we've already seen. Current flooding issues in the area have not been resolved, which is a conditional requirement for rezoning contained in the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan and also in the Bear Canyon General Development Plan that was shown early on by the developer's agent. It clearly states land uses proposed are contingent upon a satisfactory solution to the existing flood problems. In January 2022, the zoning examiner retracted his first decision to oppose the rezoning decision made a few short weeks prior in December 2021. This was based upon the developer's appointed civil engineer's amendment to his original floodplain encroachment analysis and provided a conditional letter of map revision, a CLOMA, from FEMA was obtained. This decision and the subsequent CLOMA was based upon, in my professional opinion, a flawed and narrowly focused hydrological study that has not been verified, and I say verified, by an independent third-party hydrologist or certified civil engineer. It should be noted that the use of flood risk modeling computer software programs is not an exact science, it is only an estimate, and in this case, to set flood risk insurance premiums, which in this case does not align with the surrounding community's experiences, as you've already seen earlier. It should be noted that this application for rezoning this parcel of land has been denied by the Mayor and Council 4 separate times since 1994. In addition, the proposed rezoning and development also does not meet City Ordinance number 11396, covering floodplain encroachment requirements, or align with Plan Tucson 2013 edition. So the developers also stated about this gate. Now, on the left-hand side, this is the Agua Caliente Wash crossing Bonanza Avenue, flowing north at the La Mariposa Sports Club back entry gate. And the other one is as you already heard, Dennis Karsh's rescue on the further up across Bonanza Avenue, known as Bonanza Wash. So I ask again, is it sensible for the Bonanza Avenue gate to La Mariposa Sports Club to remain closed, as it involves crossing both the Agua Caliente and Bonanza washes where the life safety rescues have occurred? So there's the map, and you can see clearly where it's going to be built. It has medium development permitted, provided these flooding issues have been resolved, and they have not been. And I've lived in the area now for 24 years. Right, and I'd just like to add up, I've attached important factual information with my opposition form covering the following matters: the BCNA plan, Sydney Ordinances 11396, Section 26, Plan Tucson, hydrology risk and flood insurance. And one shouldn't forget flood insurance, because I purchased FEMA flood insurance, but it only covers 250,000 structure, 100,000 contents. And from what I can see, it's the flooding's getting worse, and the premiums won't cover the total loss of my property. Thank you very much for your time.
40%.
Oh yes, my cost has gone up 46% in the last 4 years. I know I'm not in a flood zone. I am very risk adverse, so I do purchase flood insurance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do have all of your materials and have reviewed them, and I appreciate all of the information. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for hearing me.
I believe next is it Jane Rojas?
Yes.
Yep.
It says Rojas.
Rojas, and then there'll be the 2 videos.
Oh, you can play the videos too? My name is Jane Rojas. My husband Martin and I live at 10024 East El Poso Trail. We own 3 lots in Powderhorn Ranch, and I'm on the HOA board there. Our properties make up approximately 11 acres, all butt up against La Mariposa, the proposed rezoning, and the Agua Caliente wash. Our home sits a quarter of a mile from the Agua Caliente. La Mariposa and the proposed rezoning are right smack on the wash. Yet our house has been flooded. We are protesting the development of the rezoning for all the reasons outlined by the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association: traffic, legal issues, conservation, the BNCP's guarantees, and our personal experience, which is flooding. And we'll cover that. I've submitted my written protest along with my pictures, videos, links to the news reports, and our website, which is stopcasitavillage.org. And now we have over 2,500 verified signatures protesting this rezoning, not the 81 misstated by Ms. Walla's letter to the mayor and council. I would request that all of this information be submitted and put on the record, please. This is a picture of our home, the Agua Caliente wash, and then across on the left-hand side is the Mariposa. You can see our house is, well, actually, you can't even see our house. It's not in the picture because we're so far off. Yet we've had water all the way up to our house. I've outlined in yellow on the map where our properties are. And as you can see, we are right there next to the rezoning. We're not on top of the wash as the rezoning will be, yet we've seen water. You can go to the next page. The flooding issues have not been resolved as evidenced by flood events in 83, 93, 95, 2006, 2021, 2022, and 2023. Our personal experience and firsthand observation spanning over 30 years prove that the modeling doesn't tell the true story of this very complex flood zone. Picture number one, oh, sorry, go back. That's okay. Picture number 3 is in 1993 when we were building our home, and the flood went 1 mile approximately from in front of our house on La Mariposa all the way almost to Speedway, and the water was flowing. Picture number 4 is the same thing, just a little different angle. Picture number 5 is the 2006 flood, where my husband, standing in our backyard, is in water approximately 3 feet, rushing back to save our horses. My daughter at the time was terrified that he was going to be drowned and that the horses would be taken away. Picture number 6 is in the front of our home, which is more than a quarter of a mile away, showing water flowing down El Pozo Trail. This is our backyard inside. What you can't see is our pool because it's totally underwater. It's flowing through, rushing water. These pictures are very interesting. So we've got pictures of La Mariposa Clubhouse and tennis courts. Then go over go down from that in picture number 7 in the middle picture. That's one of the floods early on. Please notice that there was no bank protection for La Mariposa at that time yet, and they were underwater. Then you can see in 22, they had dumped up to 3 feet of illegal dumping to fill in those banks. Yet in 2023, the water flowed over all of that, all over their property. There is a video there too. And then the bottom picture shows what they were doing, trying to protect their land. So don't tell me that the flooding issue has been resolved. And I think might be some, the videos. Okay. So sideways, that's my husband, but the sideways. As Rolly explained, his property, he didn't have the video, we had the video. You can see how deep that water is. It sounds like a train coming. And when flooding waters come like this, the whole land is ruined. But the result when the water goes down is literally rattlesnakes hanging from the trees. Yes, please. That was in 2006. Again, this is up from our house, looking down in our backyard. The pool is totally covered, but notice the water. It's just I mean, it's raging, ripping everything out, totally dangerous. And as somebody else will say, transformers were blowing up. Great, thank you. I want to add, as an attorney, Mr. Hearing Examiner, you should be aware of NAI, no adverse impact, and the concept of taking, where no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without compensation. That's in Arkansas Game and Fish Commission versus the US 133 SCT 511. Proceeding with this rezoning and development would cause adverse impact, and the city and the developers would have prior knowledge. This would constitute taking, as it would be catastrophic to me and the whole area surrounding us. Please, please do not recommend rezoning to the mayor and council.
Thank you for your testimony and for your videos. I do have them on the record and I have reviewed them prior to this hearing. All right. Well, you're clearly not Dawn, so you must be Mark. I'm sorry, she's not going to testify. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mark Weigel. My wife Lisa and I live at 1481 North Houghton Road. We had purchased our property, which is 11 acres, in 1996, built our home and raised our five children there. We have, I have three major oppositions to this development. The first is traffic, and you'll see some pictures a little later on in this PowerPoint, if you haven't seen them already, that our drone took of Houghton Road backed up, clear up almost to Broadway to the south and well beyond Tanque Verde to the north. The applicant states in their literature that that we have seen is that this development will have it will be oriented towards Corte Vista Mariposa, which is is more of a driveway than it is than an arterial roadway. It seems to me that, well, even if that they directed that towards Houghton Road, it would be a mess on Houghton Road. But as it is proposed now, there will be 1,300 trips on this single lane each way road, and getting out onto Houghton Road is next to impossible at this point in time. You can see that there, what that traffic looks like, and the little road up to the top of that picture, which is supposed to support those 1,300 trips. My second opposition is its non-conformance to the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan and Plan Tucson. So and there are several, I don't know if they're contradictions or half-truths or selective omissions in that application, but as you can see on the PowerPoints at Plan Tucson on page 5.2, it ensures any development must consider that the design is sensitive to the surrounding scale and intensities of the development. It must be environmentally sensitive, and it must be compatible with development that protects established neighborhoods. And the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan, these quotes I've also pulled from the application. The engineer had claimed compliance with that plan by stating that the floodway zone would be restricted to open space and recreational uses, and so forth and so on. However, he selectively leaves out the most critical part of that quote that's in the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan. It actually reads the floodway zone will be retained as SR zoning. And so I don't know if that's intentional, accidental, but it's certainly a misrepresentation of what the Bear Canyon neighborhood plan states. And then lastly, which is pretty obvious, and I think you've probably heard this before, is that the plan encourages a mixture of housing types, emphasizing single-family owner-occupied dwellings. And this development is for rentals, as you know. So I feel with these two plans that none of the requirements are met by this requested rezoning. I think adding 121 rental units to land zoned for 6 or 7 homes does not meet the definitions of that plan. And the property is currently zoned SR, and if developed as such, would provide much more open space than the proposed development and would disturb much less wildlife. And a quick comment on that you had asked if the earlier with one of the speakers, if developing that as SR zoned lots would take up more open space. The math doesn't work for me. If you put even 10 homes on that on all that acreage, it's much less impact than 121 units. When all their parking and all the driveways and the flood controls and such. So next slide, please. Okay. Lastly is flooding. Now in July 31st of 2006, like I'd mentioned, our entire 11 acres was covered in flowing water. We had, as explained to me by Tucson Electric Power, by their crews, that the water had gotten so high on La Mariposa's property that the ground fault had malfunctioned. Then that caused power to back up through the ground source to our house. So it was in the dark of the early morning, our lights inside the house were going on and off and on and off. I could see electricity sparking from the range hood, from the stove, from the washing machines, the intercom system, the fire alarms, all going off. I ran out to shut off the electricity, but it was 3 days before that power would be restored. And as a result, we had nearly $10,000 of property damage. With almost every electrical appliance was damaged: surge protectors, smoke detectors, the outlets, the exterior lights. Hundreds of feet of fence had to be replaced. This is all three of these pictures of our backyard. If you could advance that one more time for me, please. This is my rooftop. We're right close to Mariposa's tennis courts. So the first picture is looking to the southwest. The picture top right is looking due west, and the picture at the bottom is looking northwest. And I think I may have one more picture. Yeah, and this is looking south. This water this is a before and after sort of shot. That water that's in the front yard there is all agua caliente water. Though, please advance. Even though our lot is 5 feet lower than the agua caliente wash, and even though it is 25 or 1,200 feet away from our home, when it overflows, that excess water flows south through our front yard. It converges by those tennis courts with the Tanque Verde and continues flowing west. So this has not been our only flood by any means, but it has been the worst. And along with all these projections and models and analysis, I don't take a lot of stock in them because this is our reality. This is what we've lived through. So my wife and I strongly oppose this project for those following reasons: that it contributes to existing traffic difficulties, does not meet the requirement of being in harmony with the existing community, and creates increased flooding problems for us and our neighbors. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Could you make sure that your PowerPoint is presented? I don't remember reviewing that one beforehand. So if you could send a copy of that, I'd appreciate it.
I believe you did that. I thought you had done that. Okay, you should. Yeah, those pictures will be in the packet from the two previous zoning examiner meetings. But I'll put the PowerPoints together and get it to you. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe the next one is Heidi, is it? Yes.
Hello, okay, do we have my PowerPoint?
Yes, I believe I do. Well, I have your letter. I'm not sure I have your PowerPoint, but I definitely have your letter.
Okay, well, the
The
picture,
letter has pictures in it.
few pictures that we'll show tonight, and I can send you copies if you'd like.
That's okay. I have your materials, and it does have the pictures in your submitted materials.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for hearing me tonight. My name is Heidi Schul. I live at 9227 East Lakeside Court in the lakes at Castle Rock, which is just downstream from the convergence of the Tanque Verde and Agua Caliente washes. I'm a Tucson native. I've lived in the Tanque Verde Valley for 50 years, and 19 of those years in the lakes at Castle Rock, and I oppose this rezoning. You've already heard about how flooding is a problem in the Tanque Verde Valley. If you could go down to the pictures, please. So this one, you've heard about the 1983 flooding. My neighborhood where I lived at the time was flooded. This picture is on the left is Agua Caliente Wash on Houghton, just adjacent to the proposed rezoning. So that's my 1983 story. In 1993, I was working with Coronado National Forest, and we did an assist to Pima County Sheriff's Office and the Army Corps of Engineers to evacuate residents who were flooded in the East Tanque Verde Valley. And the picture on the right shows Houghton and Tanque Verde, an intersection that was flooded with waters from Agua Caliente at that point. So the next one, this shows my neighborhood. Over on the right is August of 2021, flooding from Tanque Verde Wash due to heavy rains. And then the two on the left, the top one shows us looking, you can see kind of a ribbon going to left to right up towards the top. That's Tanque Verde Creek, which is running. The stone channel that is running from bottom to top is a drainage that's intended to carry water from our neighborhood into the wash. In this case, the wash backed up and it carried water into our neighborhood. And the bottom picture shows that where that trench, that culvert spills out onto the road and where it was flooding our neighborhood. So this is just an example that flooding is a year-round phenomenon in this area. And it's also important to note that during some of these earlier incidents, Tanque Verde Creek bed was quite a bit deeper than it is now. And so we've experienced significant sedimentation since those times, resulting in more severe flooding. So what I'm going to talk about next a little bit is things that are affecting what's upstream of us and how that will result in what happens with us downstream. So we all are hearing about climate change. In 2023, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported that year, 2023, was the hottest year on Earth on record. December 2024 has just been recorded as the driest December here in Tucson on record. So climate change is happening, is causing a lot of things to be different than they used to be. My career, I worked for 30 years with the Coronado National Forest in an interdisciplinary career. My relevant experience includes biology, ecology, watershed management, and emergency management, including wildfire and flooding. And that experience is helping me a lot in what I'm thinking about what's happening here. Regarding fire season, and this gets to what happens upstream. Wildfire season, which used to be a summer thing, is now year-round. We have fire years, and I'm speaking specifically and more generally, but in the Tucson Basin and for our mountain ranges, the Catalinas and the Rincons, which influence us, we have year-round fire season. And I've worked both for the Coronado National Forest and for Saguaro National Park. So I'm seeing firsthand what's happening here with wildfires, which I worked with. And so what we're seeing changing, for an example, on Coronado National Forest, we saw the Bullock Fire in 2002. Oh my, it's 30,000 acres. That's the biggest fire we've ever seen on the forest. Then in 2003, here came Aspen. It was even bigger at 85,000 1 year later, and it took out a lot of the town of Summerhaven. Then in 2020, the Bighorn Fire dwarfed that, still larger at 120,000 acres, and it took us a year and a half to put out. A month and a half to suppress. And so this is just an example of what's happening with wildfires in the mountains around us. And so the results are, what do you see here? What happens downstream after these wildfires. And the picture on the bottom left is a good example. When fire goes through, it doesn't burn as a uniform, everything black all of the time. What you see here at the lower part of that picture is low fire severity, where it stays on the ground. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but right above that, and in the higher picture, is high severity. So low severity is really beneficial. It does the good things fire is supposed to do. When you have moderate to high severity, which you can see here, a significant amount of vegetation is consumed and watersheds are damaged. So there's a lack of canopy cover, which means the soil protection is gone from precipitation. That leads to impact runoff, sedimentation downstream. Similarly, when the vegetation is burned away, the lack of roots to hold soil in place results in increased runoff, erosion, downstream deposition, and sedimentation. And so additionally, when you see high severity fire like you see in the burned off places there, the soil can become hydrophobic, which means it's cooked and it can't absorb water, and it acts just like glass, and the raw water runs down at a high velocity. So that's when we see fires in the mountains, look where it's going to go downstream, the water, and also then without that protective vegetation, and the bottom one's Mount Lemmon, by the way, without that protective vegetation, then the soil is going to come down with it. So this is what we can expect as we're going to be seeing more of these bigger fires with more damage, more severe, high severity, it's harder to put out. And so we're going to be seeing more water and more sedimentation come down these washes. And Agua Caliente is one of them, and so is Tanque Verde. So my point is we're going to be seeing more water and more soil lifting those wash beds. So flooding is going to become worse. So what does all of this mean? We have floodplain maps and hydrological studies. These are tools to use in urban planning. We also have the realities that we are already living with some of the stories that you've heard about tonight. We'll see more frequent, hotter, destructive, and unstoppable wildfires upstream, damaging watersheds, moving sediment, and raising the level of washes adjacent to this proposed development and to our properties. Moisture absorbing ground is a valued asset. Please consider the tremendous costs versus benefits of this proposal. We have the choice to prevent increased flooding and additional loss of life and property. And then I need to add one more point, and that's something that I've talked about as we've called it emergency exit capacity. We have only 2 roads out of the valley, Tanque Verde Valley, in case of emergency evacuations, such as we saw in 1993 and 1983. That's Houghton Road and Tanque Verde Road. These roads will already be over capacity in cases of evacuation. And I need to also add that in the current Palisades fire in California and the fires they're experiencing, residents had to abandon vehicles and flee on foot. And any firefighter, and a lot of us know, fire can move a lot faster than you can run. And so please consider this when you're making these decisions. This is a fire evacuation from the Rodeo Cheta fire, just showing how traffic can back up. And we've only got 2 roads to take all of the residents that are currently out there, and they can't handle it. So I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your materials. Really appreciate it. Go ahead, sir.
Yep, there you go. Yep. Well, good evening, Mr. Cassidy. Again, my name's Tom. My wife and I live at 2449 North Lightning A Drive in the Lakes of Castle Rock, and I currently serve as the president of Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association, as was noted before. I'm speaking tonight in strong opposition to the proposed rezoning change and development of Casita Village at La Mariposa. Less than a month ago, I addressed the vice mayor and council meeting strongly supporting the city's attorney recommendation to remand the matter back to your office, allowing Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association to work with the city to address concerns we believe have not adequately been addressed since the January 2022 zoning examiner's recommended approval. The remand was approved, however, less than 4 days later of that meeting. I was disappointed to see this city sign posted. And my first question was, what's the rush? Certainly based on meetings that John Lockwood, the vice president, and I had with Councilmember Cunningham and Pima County Flood Control District Eric Shep, as well as virtual meetings with the floodplain manager, Mr. Zuniga, and Mr. Brian Cosin from the flood insurance program from the Department of Water Resources. Looking just to have a discussion of concerns that remain to today. So I have been assessing this proposed development since Councilmember Cunningham asked me to do so almost 3 years ago, based on my professional background as a atmospheric scientist, PhD from University of Arizona, space systems engineer with the Air Force, NOAA, and industry has worked closely with FEMA in the past. Throughout that assessment, I've become increasingly concerned about evident unresolved hydrological risk management and safety issues that lead me to believe this is a poor business decision. John Lockwood has addressed some of the risk management decisions, but mine are as follows. The proposed development lies in the special flood hazard area and has no discernible all-weather access, which is a huge safety issue. My information, the attachment of this one, there's a picture of an enhanced view of the proposed development area, shows the proposed development area in a special flood hazard zone, the peanut in that area. And the development has only one access road, East Corte Vista, La Mariposa, which routinely floods in the examples that have been given before. My second concerns have to do with FEMA. There are 2 FEMA processes used by the city of Tucson for risk assessment that have come under very heavy criticism due to Hurricane Helene lessons learned. First, FEMA's flood insurance maps are criticized as being based on antiquated data and obsolete models. They do use 2-dimensional models. FEMA does not have the money to go 3-dimensional, and neither the city or FEMA use those. But there's attachment 3 to my written report that talks about that outdated nature. And then there's FEMA's Technical Mapping Council, which is now called for FEMA to scrap its fill and build process, which is the same process that's used in this area. And there's some very strong statements about the reason for that, and it's been out for a little over a year. It has to do with the danger to environmental resources, but also to the type of flooding that we've seen already evidenced in the reports that you received from neighbors earlier today. Then the third one, the developer's application to the city of Tucson and FEMA for a conditional letter of map revision was incomplete and contained factually inaccurate information. The report from J.E. Fuller to the developers was delivered on 31 October of 2022. After that, there was no discussion or dialogue between J.E. Fuller and the developers as they prepared their preparation of the report to the city and FEMA, which began in March and ended in June of 2023. And I have a written documentation from J.E. Fuller that says that was not the case, that they did not review the report that went to the city and to FEMA. Next, the proposed development as has already been mentioned before, the proposed development has been denied by the mayor and council 4 previous times since 1994. And the only thing that I see has changed here is the weather's gotten worse. Next is that Bear Canyon neighborhood homeowners who have suffered the effects of this severe flooding a dozen times over 42 years. And they have done that even before a proposed development is built. And so they're strongly opposed to this proposal, and I think for good reason. Then there are questions and concerns raised by an independent hydrologist in a recent study that I received just 2 days ago from Dr. Hari Kandel, and he is going to speak to that in a few minutes. But it has to do a lot with, again, with looking at the observations that go along with the models. As John Lockwood has already said, the models are weak. They need to be verified and validated. If the models are incomplete, as a PhD scientist and a numerical modeler, you do not rely on the models, you rely on the observations. And the observations tonight have been pretty clear. of the extent of the flooding problem that has happened and in the future will likely happen more, with a 15 to 20% increase in flooding expected by NOAA. So based on this assessment, I strongly recommend you disapprove the request for the rezoning. However, should you choose to proceed, I request that you at least agree to a technical exchange meeting with all stakeholders engaged in this process with this proposed development to review and discuss the information that's been shared. That's all I have, sir. From now, the last speaker, Peggy Carson, is available and I saw that she's on, as well as Dr. Pendel. They're both available. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I have some slides to show you. However, I'm not getting the call up to be able to bring my slides up. I did send you copies of my slides, so I'll just talk to my presentation. My name is Peggy Carson. I live at 2330 North Bonanza Avenue. My spouse and I purchased our home in the summer of 2005 and moved into our house in 2007 after I retired from the military. At the time, we did not know about the plan to widen Tanque Verde when we purchased our home. So I'm coming at it from a little bit different angle. I'm coming at it from the Bonanza Street viewpoint. We recently had city personnel come out and visit our site, and to include Ted Brzezowski from Paul Cunningham's office. And the first thing they said when they showed up on our property was that based on computer models, we're not getting any more water volume than prior to Tanque Verde widening. However, we really are living a different reality, and our pictures that you have show a different reality than what the models show. From 2005 until the project started in 2010, there was no flooding at the Bonanza Wash. However, in July of 2010, the first flood occurred just after the contractor started digging ground for the box culverts and catch basin behind our neighbor's property. That was also the first water rescue where a vehicle tried to cross the wash on Tanque Verde without realizing the water was flowing up and over the concrete barriers placed on both sides of Tanque Verde. The flood was so severe, the contractor had to wait 2 to 3 days for the pooling water to subside before they could redig the area nearest the concrete barriers. And my first pictures show what that looked like after the flooding. And then once they cleared the area for the box culverts. In December of 2010, we had flooding again after the culverts were completed. In June of 2011, the rock baskets and rock blanket were completed. However, no vegetation had been planted along the sides of the basin yet. In July, the next flood occurred and partially filled in the rock blanket with sediment. We were told the rock blanket was to slow water down so that we would not experience higher water velocities once the water hit our property, since the culverts were 100 feet across and only 8 to 10 feet across on our property. In September of 2011, we had another flood that completely filled in the rock baskets and blanket with sediment. In 2013, we had yet another flood that created a secondary wash further into our property. And you can see in the pictures that the basin is starting to fill in with brush and trees. By 2016, the basin was filled in, and when that flood occurred, it just made the primary and secondary washes on our property deeper and wider due to velocity. From 2021 to 2023, we had at least one flood each year. In 2021, there were 2 floods. And the individuals that talked about the water rescues, those occurred right at the end of our property on Bonanza Avenue. So we had at least one flood each year. In 2021, we had 2 floods, 1 week apart. And in each case, there was a water rescue on Bonanza at the end of our property. Thankfully, in all 3 water rescues, there was no loss of life. However, we came very close to losing some of our very dear neighbors. As you can see in our pictures from 2021, the basin is filled in with plant life and is no longer slowing water down, only directing water with increased velocity. As well, the secondary wash is now closer to our horse stalls and arena. And in 2021, We had to move our horses to higher ground when 2 stalls in our arena were completely underwater. We know the city floodway fringe development code says shall not generate adverse impacts, which we have experienced, shall not result in higher floodwater velocities, which we've experienced and now have damage and loss to our property, shall not significantly increase channel or bank erosion, which we have experienced. Nobody maintains the box culvert basin, and therefore we have experienced more often and worse flooding than ever before. The Bonanza Wash feeds into the Agua Caliente, and when it is flooding, Bonanza Wash flooding becomes worse for us and our neighbors in Forest Grove and Castle Rock. And our additional pictures validate my statement and definitely would like them to be made part of the record. The developer mentions they work with the neighborhood association. However, in their letter to you, as a former BCNA board member, the developer never reached out to work with our association on our issues during the period of time that I was a board officer. Lastly, we did not understand that La Mariposa had business access via our residential street when we purchased our home. We've lived with La Mariposa and their patrons' lack of respect for our neighborhood and street. The gate has been closed for 2 years now, and we finally don't have significant numbers of cars speeding up and down our street, throwing trash out, throwing liquor bottles out, causing dangers for us and our neighbors walking dogs and riding horses, since there are no sidewalks or safe easement for us to traverse on. And so we've had fewer potential incidents of accidents as a result of the gate being closed. We strongly oppose this development due to flooding, traffic. We drive Houghton Road more often than not because Tanque Verde at Bear Canyon and Catalina Highway are so congested. We generally take Houghton Road if we have to go into town. And so the fact that the developer's traffic study was done in June of 2021, after schools were out, snowbirds were gone, and what?
The vegetation.
Yeah, so the snowbirds were gone, schools were out, and COVID was just ending. So traffic study, I would love to see a traffic study today done for that reason, because it was a study that was done when there was very little traffic on Houghton Road. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, sir.
Thank you very much. I do have your PowerPoint presentation. I have looked at it. In fact, I was looking at it as you were presenting, so I'm sorry that you weren't able to put it up on the screen.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there, but I've got a bum arm at the moment.
Sorry to hear that. Thank you for your presentation and your materials.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Is Dr. Condell going to present? There he is. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. My name is Dr. Harry Condell. I'm an associate professor at the Lake Superior State University. I'm a hydrologist. I teach geology and hydrology in there. Excuse me. So I was contacted by the Environmental Protection Network to help with this flooding issue in this neighborhood in October. And after that time, I was looking at some of the brief document related to the Clomer submitted by the developer. And I found that there was some data updating issue and outdated data use and that kind of thing. And I wanted to look at what their model is and whether the model was validated with the observed data or not. So I could not see any validation aspect of that data. And that's why I wanted to look at what is the observed flood or what is the observed amount of the stream flow in the Tanque Verde or nearby streams in there. So I was able to find out the data from the USGS station. It's a little bit downstream from the confluence between the Tanque Verde and then the Agua Caliente was. As hydrologists do, I looked at the 54 years of the peak flood, past 54 years, and analyzed the flood frequency and recurrence interval of those flood. As you have heard before, some of the recent floods, for example, the 2006 came out on the top, the first ranked flood, 26,600 CFS flow in the Tanque Verde. 2021 came out as the third rank, and the one that was also mentioned in January of 2023 came out in the 15th rank in that ranking of the peak flood within that 54 years of data. So after that, as we use the probability of the flood, that's what the probability calculation gives you, the 100-year flood or 50-year flood or any other recurrence interval. As you can see on my recurrence interval chart, I use that to compare the recurrence interval with the stream flow amount. And in the model that was presented, they put 23,000 cubic feet per second as the 100-year recurrence interval flood. But my analysis of those 54 years of data shows that 24,500 comes out as a 25-year recurrence interval flood. So, and then I compared that with the gauge height from that particular location. As you can see in my presentation, those already exceed, those 24,500, for example, exceed about 12 feet height from the base of the river. And I also looked at those couple of the same dates from one of the sensor from the Agua Caliente was. As you can see, we're looking at about 12 feet of water in the 25 years recurrence interval in the Tanque Verde, and then about 4 feet of water in the Agua Caliente was. And in that little corner between those two, that's where the proposed development is occurring, that confluence between the Agua Caliente and the Tanque Verde. If that amount of water flows in those two washes, the two creeks, there is no way that water has the access point to go down because it's the so gentle slope in there. So I looked at that data and it showed that all these neighbor roads will be flooded because if you look at the USGS contour map, it's basically if you add that amount of water, 11 feet of water on the top of that contour, all of these roads, the Houghton Road in the east, the other roads in the north and south, all of those roads will be flooded, will be inundated by the water. I also looked at some of the literature to compare what the model was talking about. And what the model says in the Clomer is they considered the subcritical flow when they modeled the HEC-RAS. And the literature talks about if the flow in these creeks exceed the 1% probability, which we're talking about as 40,000 CFS in the Tanque Verde. And as we can see, the 25 years is 24,500 CFS, and 23,000 is what they have called as the 100-year recurrence interval, which is way low compared to what we see in the observed data. Because it exceeds that flow. If the flow exceeds that, and we have a trained river, like we're talking about channelized river, elevated platform, and then putting culverts and those, the flow is not only subcritical as they talk about. The flow will be supercritical in some areas and subcritical in other areas. What I'm talking about is the velocity difference. Natural channel will be subcritical, and then more channelized area and culverts will be supercritical. What hydrologists do is they take into account the supercritical to the subcritical jump. That's where the wave and energy dissipation occurs and erosion and scouring occurs. That part is not considered in that modeling. So looking at these observed data and looking at some of these practices or researchers do in hydrology, I see that there is a huge risk of flooding in that neighborhood. all the roads around. And I also see that the model is kind of short of not validating the data and also not considering some of these practices the researchers, hydrologist researchers do. So that's my observation. That's my conclusion. And thank you for listening that.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, before you go, if I could ask the whoever's running the system to let me share my screen to make sure that I have the correct material. I was looking at your material as you gave your presentation, and I just want to make sure that what I have is the final information here.
You could share that, Mr. Cassidy.
Yes, very good. Here we go. I don't know if you can see this screen now.
Yeah, the first one is with the point showing is the
Yes.
USGS station.
And then
Yes.
you were talking about the 4 feet over, and that was this. Wow, this is the 11-foot height.
Yeah,
that
this
you
is the
showed.
Tanque Verde, which is 11 foot. And if we expand that to, I think the bottom figure shows you the 100-year and beyond 50-year model. And then if you
Okay.
do it, if you do it with the Agua Caliente, then it shows you the 4 feet for one of the date.
Yes. Right here.
Yeah, that was, that
Yes.
2023, which is basically in my ranking, comes out as the 15th rank flow from that USGS station.
I see. Okay. So this is the correct, this is what I should be looking at to
Right, yeah.
reference your work. Very good. Okay. That's what I wanted to make sure I had the correct information. Thank you so much for your information. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We also have Joanna and James Trago had asked to speak. I don't know if they're here. Well, and actually, before we get to them, let me check back with the folks who were at the office there, at the ward office, and see if there were any other speakers that you wanted to put on the record before I open it up to some of the other folks who asked to speak.
No, sir. I think we've had all our speakers, and in fact, we have Jim and Joanne Trago right here for you.
Oh, okay, very good, excellent. So if we could have, and again, I do have your PowerPoint information that you submitted. I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to show it, but
I think so.
okay, go ahead.
Joanne,
TVVA.
no,
There you go.
no, that one's Jim's. Mine's the other one. That's me. Thank you, Ted. Good evening, Mr. Cassidy. Thank you for this opportunity to speak tonight. I truly appreciate it. My name is Joanne Trago. My address is 10410 East Rancho del Este in Tucson. I am here to talk about the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. Next slide. As you know, the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan was accepted and adopted by the mayor and council in October of 1984. And in our view, this plan is a legally binding agreement. Ted? The reason I say that is because the city of Tucson actually engaged with Tanque Verde citizens, where an offer was accepted with intent and consideration. The Bear Canyon neighbors gave up their Pima County affiliation by allowing the city to annex 33 square miles or 925 acres of their land, predicated upon the city of Tucson promising the neighbors would have authority to manage the direction of newly proposed developments that were in accordance with that plan. And the intent of this agreement was to abide by the plan for all future proposed developments. I bring this up because we also have authority and capacity that goes along with a legally binding agreement or a contract. If you look at the document on the left, Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, we have mayor and council, citizens advisory, the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Planning Committee, consultants, and the planning department. There were a total of 47 signatories on this document. And I want to make sure that you understand that the Tanque Verde Valley Association, of which I am a director, was also a signatory on this document. Those people who contributed to develop this plan did it in the spirit of reciprocity. Without the city promising that they could manage future developments in this area, the residents never would have agreed to the annexation. Next slide. I also want to bring up the fact that I see 5 rezoning denials, not 4. There were 3 applications denied from 94 to 97 for violating the plan. The 2005 application was denied unanimously by mayor and council. And you will recall December 2021, zoning examiner denied this application for lack of compliance with Plan Tucson and the BCN plan. So if we've had 5 zoning examiners, 5 mayors, and 5 city councils denying these requests, what makes this request different? I'm having a hard time with that question. C9-2120 violates the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, and approval by the city at this point in time is tantamount to breach of contract. Now is the time for the city to demonstrate its responsibility to the citizens of Tanque Verde and uphold the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan and deny this request. I also want to talk about good faith and current events. The developer publicly stated, and I'm paraphrasing, that he couldn't believe the zoning examiner was allowing his development proposal to be challenged or questioned by neighbors after all the support that he provided to the city over the years. Needless to say, in the past 3 years, City of Tucson employees in positions of authority publicly endorsed this rezoning request. Christina Swallow, Assistant City Manager, recently wrote a 6-page, very detailed recommendation to Mayor and Council. John Beal, former Director of PDSD, has on several occasions made presentations and given reports that support this rezoning permit. And I have witnessed 2 to 4 members of the Planning and Development Department attending virtual meetings with Planning Center representatives. Not once has the City of Tucson represented nor made any mention of the obligation it has to the Bear Canyon neighborhood, and we are partners with the city. Before I ask you to consider what I'm thinking, I just want to put something out that occurred tonight. I am incredibly offended that the developer put forth the notion that adding an equine trail to this proposal would be acceptable. My husband and I were actually the ones who spoke with Councilman Cunningham a few years back about declaring Tanque Verde as an equine district. We did that because we have a multitude of equestrian stores, shops, businesses, trails, people who have horses on their property and ride often. And we want to maintain and protect the rural environment that we so love in Tanque Verde. And in doing so, we ask that it become an equine district. I am terribly offended that the developer wants to put 121 rental units on less than 20 acres of land, put in a trail that horses can go down, and say that they're kindly complying with our request for an equine district. I find that very insulting. With that, I respectfully submit that the City of Tucson does have a legal obligation to the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, to the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association, and not to the developers. I surely hope that you will recognize the importance of our contract, and I thank you for giving me this time.
Thank you for your presentation and for your materials. I also have a request from Stuart Cheney. And actually, before I get there, I saw that someone named Beryl raised their hand. So I don't know whether that was an indication that you want to speak, but you'll get an opportunity in a moment. So if Stuart Cheney is there, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Pull mine up. I'm Jim Trigo. We live at 10410.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Oops. Go ahead. I didn't realize it was Mr. Trigo. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Jim Trigo. I live at 10410 East Rancho del Este. I am currently the president of the Tanque Verde Valley Association. It is the oldest and largest volunteer nonprofit association in the area. Our goal is protecting the ecological and environmental characteristics of our area while dedicating efforts to preserve and improve the scenic assets that we have. We are at this point sitting between 800 and 900 members. TVVA does not subscribe to the notion of NIMBYs, which you hear a lot around here, purportedly with the mindset that nothing happens, not in my backyard. Rather, we seek to promote intelligent development of residential, commercial, or public, such that the current ecological, environmental, and historic nature of the area is maintained. We seek to collaborate with all interested parties, such as Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association, the City of Tucson, as you've heard a number of times. We've worked with Paul Cunningham. We would work with multiple HOAs, local property owners, and developers to resolve issues that affect the entire Tanque Verde Valley and east side of Tucson. TVVA is an active participant in the opposition to this rezoning request. Our current focus is on proposed developments in floodplains and mesquite bosques that are critical to absorbing and dissipating downstream flood impacts. I think you've heard a good bit about this tonight. And really what we're looking is to provide important natural mesquite bosque habitat and cooling corridors through Tucson's rapidly developing urban environment. This parcel is a significant component of the Sabino and Tanque Verde shallow groundwater area. In its current state, this property provides renewable groundwater and supports remaining remnants of critical riparian forests. Most of the property is classified as important riparian and biological core management area under its conservation land systems. As you noted before, Kate Hutton referenced this, the conservation land systems. The one thing that I would like to reemphasize is that the document that she was working from requires that 95% open space be set aside in these developments. In this particular case, we're looking at just 32.5%. With that, let's go one more. Tucson is encountering increasingly severe weather and longer droughts. To mitigate impacts on Tanque Verde Valley and create resilience for climate challenges, we need to preserve, reclaim, and steward our existing riparian forests. Tanque Verde and Agua Caliente watershed is of particular importance. And if you'll note in the 2009 City and Council Water Supply report, they said exactly that. Less than half an inch of rainfall in this area can help recharge that aquifer. Next page. Unanimous opposition by the TVA Board of Directors to the Casita Village at La Mariposa. As we support orderly and intelligent development, we do not view this proposal as intelligent. This proposal is another example, we believe, of a development geared strictly to maximizing owner development profits while generally resisting or totally ignoring inputs from the area's citizenry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I thought that was Katie Houghton's presentation, so I had it with her material, so I appreciate it. I did look at it, though. Is there anyone else there in the ward office who would like to speak before I open it up to some other folks who have asked to speak?
No, sir. Thank you very much. You've been very
Okay,
kind.
thank you. I have a request from Stuart Cheney to speak as Mr. Cheney on the Zoom call. And I see that Beryl's hand is up. Beryl, if you would like to speak, go ahead and unmute and you have the floor.
Do I start now?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, hang on. I gotta go back to my presentation. And I'm not very good at this. I'm Beryl Baker, reside at 2723 South Mission. I'm a volunteer steward for the West Branch of the Santa Cruz River Conservation Area. I'm delighted at all the very good reasons Bear Canyon residents have presented to not rezone this property. Great examples of why people in general should not build near washes or rivers. We cannot match all the good info presented. However, we are speaking from long experience with environmental and political issues and in support of the folks against this development. We read the developer and the other comments about this plan. It is all about placating an end run around the intent of the ERZ. Agua Caliente Wash and Tanque Verde Wash have long been jewels of wildlife habitat. Putting human Band-Aids in jargon to make it seem okay to destroy parts of one of the last natural resource areas in the Tucson area is unpardonable. There is always talk of stopping urban sprawl, yet it remains a main part of the developer's plans to continue to destroy what makes Tucson the unique place of wildlife habitat that it has had. The whole development should be denied. Although developers will continue to find many other areas to destroy, they should instead be part of the solutions to keep the wonders of Tucson intact. This area is part of the wonders of Tucson with its rich wildlife habitat along the major wash. Please deny this plan, leaving in place the SR zoning, which encourages retention of wildlife habitat due to less development. Thank you for this opportunity to express our concerns for maintaining this wildlife habitat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. I see that Kenny Bobby also, someone by the name of Kenny Bobby also has their hand up. If you would like to speak, you now have the floor. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, my name is Kenny. I've lived on the Tanque Verde Wash in the 49ers since June of 2000, and people love walking their dogs, taking horses, and kids playing in the wash is very common, and the paths that they create significantly impacts the water's flow and direction each monsoon season. 121 homes and maybe 3 people per home is 363 people. And I don't see how these additional pedestrians paths in the Agua Caliente Wash can be anticipated with the assessments done. Lastly, I've been a member of La Mariposa Gym since 2004, and I like to work out at the very end of the day when it's almost completely empty. And even when I leave La Mariposa at their weekday closing time of 9 p.m., I usually have to wait for quite a while at Houghton for traffic to clear enough to join either northbound or southbound traffic on Houghton Road. They're estimated 1,300 visits per day, and there's 1,440 minutes in a day. It's hard to picture the existing roadway supporting that increase. That's all I have.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate that. Do we have any other proposed speakers? Anyone else at all? You can unmute and speak up. There you are.
Good
Yes,
evening,
please
Mr.
state your
Cass.
name.
Thank you for having me. I don't have a presentation, but I would just simply like to read you my protest letter. My name is Margot Susko. I live at 10300 East Flintlock Trail, which is very near the northeast corner of Tanque Verde and Houghton. I've lived at this address since 1974. I've experienced firsthand the floods of 1983 and 1993, so I am keenly aware of flooding issues and the repercussions of shifting water. The reality is that this project puts residents and the integrity of our properties and homes at risk. Far too often decisions are made, permits given, rezoning permitted, and homeowners are left holding the bag. Just ask our friends at Houghton and Snyder when their homes, their living rooms turn into lakes when it rains and there's no one to talk to. That is our reality. With no perceived RTA plan also in place for the widening of Houghton Road between Tanque Verde and Speedway, we have one-lane streets which are congested and slow-moving. We have a very slow-moving intersection now with turn lane arrows, and this is not set up to accommodate that level of traffic increase, especially at high traffic crimes. And again, I am not a fan of studies because I live this every day. If you can imagine, when you see the lines 2 to 3 times a day on Houghton Road, heading north and heading south, if you are heading north on Houghton Road and you are coming out of this and trying to take a left into this from Houghton Road without a turn lane, that is going to back traffic up significantly. It's a very, very congested area. I'd also like to mention spot zoning. There is nothing else like this project in a 5-mile area. And as mentioned, it does not follow the proposed plan of the area. This project will adversely harm our riparian area and wildlife corridor. We ask for smart, conscientious growth that is in harmony with our wildlife and area, and not that congests the streets, harms our wildlife, and floods our homes and land. You cannot throw concrete and dirt into the wash illegally, or raise an area with dirt and think in terms of water movement. It does not affect all the land around it. You cannot control the flow of water in washes and tributaries. This land has remained vacant for a very long time for a reason, and a property of this magnitude should not move forward. I protest this project, and I respectfully thank you for your time.
Thank you. Did you give your address? I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you give your address on the record? I'm sorry.
10300 East Flintlock Trail.
Flint Rock Trail. Okay.
Flintlock Trail.
Lock
Thank you,
Trail.
sir.
Thank you. Do we have any other requested speakers, including anyone attending by Zoom? I don't see any hands. All right, seeing none, I'd like to, at this point, turn it back over to the applicant. Does the applicant wish to address any points that have been raised and to give a closing statement?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cassidy, for the time here. I think the last statement that we would like to make here, unless you would like us to clarify anything beyond what we're about to say. But at this point, our team, we feel that we have gone above and done everything that we can do to ensure that this project can be built without flooding concerns on it. And that it will not exacerbate any of the surrounding properties' concerns. Part of the challenge, I think, that a lot of the neighbors here are demonstrating in their presentations are flooding concerns that happen along Bonanza Road. And Bonanza Road is within the wash. It's about 10 feet lower than our property, and where the proposed development is about 1,500 feet away from the hot spot where flooding occurs. And so while we understand and sympathize with the neighbors' concerns and stories of existing flooding, we have a slew of professionals that are certified civil engineers in the state of Arizona, as well as professionals within the city, Pima County Flood Control Department, as well as FEMA and other local engineers here that stand behind the analysis that we're proposing. As it relates to the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan, I think we've demonstrated it, through this process at many events, as well as at previous hearings with the zoning examiner, which ultimately led to his decision changing, that we are in fact in compliance with Plan Tucson and the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Plan. The designation in that space suggests that this is medium density residential, which the R2 zone is exactly that. There was notion of spot zoning. There is more intensive zoning. The R2 zone is less intense than the the O3 and the C1 zoning that make up part of the rezoning area, as well, not the rezoning area, excuse me, the development area, as well as adjacent and existing at the resort, which again, suggesting that higher intensity development has always been contemplated in this property, contingent upon an analysis that suggests flooding can be dealt with at a localized situation. There is no requirement within the city of Tucson that any single property owner deal with global and regional issues, but rather at the individual site itself. And that's what we've demonstrated through our analysis, in which FEMA, the city, as well as the flood control department have all concurred with. So we do believe that we have done everything that we can. As it relates to protected riparian habitat and wildlife, as I mentioned at the onset of my presentation, before we started even putting pen to paper to design a site plan itself, we went out and evaluated that protected riparian habitat and did a variety of studies to demonstrate exactly where those limits would be. And that was done in compliance with the City of Tucson floodplain regulation and the Native Plant Preservation Ordinance, which is what is stipulated, as the requirement here. While we appreciate the notion of the CLS, that is not applicable within the city confines, as that's a Pima County adopted ordinance. And so as we are providing some open space and honoring that protected riparian habitat, full compliance with the CLS is not necessary. And with that, I think that's all we would like to elaborate on, unless there's anything specific that you heard that you would like more information on from us.
The one of the presenters mentioned that J.E. Fuller, and you also in your initial presentation mentioned that the hydrology firm J.E. Fuller had been engaged in discussions and confirmed some of the information. But one of the other speakers said, gave an indication that there was not a follow-up with J.E. Fuller, that they did not participate in the in the Clomer process. What response do you have to that?
Well, that was the most interesting thing there, Mr. Cassidy. Our computer just like completely shut down and kicked us off. So I started to hear your question there. If I may reiterate real quick, I think you were asking that it was mentioned that J.E. Fuller did not review our application at some point in the process or something to that. And what is our
Correct.
response? Is that right?
Yes.
So as I understand, and I've got Ryan Stuckey here from CEC, as part of this process, it was asked of us to have a third-party reviewer analyze the encroachment analysis that went into our FEMA application. After a series of back and forth with them on the encroachment analysis that fueled the application for Clomer, J.E. Fuller did review that aspect. Now, going back and saying, hey, this is the actual final application that is going to be submitted to it, they perhaps did not review that aspect of it, but they 100% did review the analysis that fed the application submittal. So every bit of the encroachment, there was a series of refinements, and we can speak more to that if you would like.
Right, yeah, my understanding is that we provided the information to J.E. Fuller upon request, and they reviewed it. We took the recommendations, incorporated into the plan, and that's what was submitted to FEMA as part of the Clomer application. I think maybe where there's, I don't want to call it confusion, but a discrepancy is that it was not sent back to J.E. Fuller, the completed package, before it was sent to the city, into the Pima County, into the FEMA for the Clomer application.
So they were involved in the encroachment analysis at the front end, but it didn't go back to them.
That's my
Is your
yeah.
point. Okay. I see that it looks like we have Mr. Adang also with a raised hand, or at least he's sitting at the desk at Ward 2. Normally we don't reopen it up for public comment, but I'm willing to hear what you have to say if you wanted to add something, sir.
Yes, sir. In my response to you, my recommendation was to have a roundtable with your staff and the players. I'm never one to really have this type of discussion in an open meeting. I believe it needs to be had. I think what Ms. Willett just mentioned and the other is exactly right. There was no, after the delivery of the report on October 31st of 2022, there was no engagement with Fuller with actually an 8-point recommendations, of which only a couple had to do with encroachment. There are other items that should have been addressed and looked at. And as a result of that, in my 21 years of experience as a space systems engineer, as a trusted agent for government agencies, I'm very familiar with independent verification and validation. When someone gives you a report and you say, we'll take a look at it, you don't get back to that, say, yeah, we incorporated it and we sent it on. That's when you come back and saying, you ask the question, did we cover everything that you recommended that we cover? That's independent verification and validation. That did not occur. I think that's a shortfall. And I think there are other weaknesses in the Clomer report that have to do with modeling and observations that Dr. Kendall has mentioned. I think those need to be discussed as well.
All right. Thank you very much for your follow-up comments. All right. I will let you speak also again.
I've got some stuff to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate that. There were some things that Lexi had mentioned that were said.
This is Jane. I'm sorry. This is Jane Rojas again.
Jane Rojas, right?
Yes.
There were several items, 6 actually, that Lexi had mentioned that are not factual. The Planning Center did not have a dialogue with the neighbors. I am a neighbor. Mark is a neighbor. Rolly is a neighbor. We do not live on Bonanza. We live on the Agua Caliente. And so her thing of dismissing the flooding because we're on Bonanza is not accurate at all. They said that they have a satisfactory solution to the existing flood problems. That is not accurate. They said that the traffic impact analysis, Houghton Road can handle the increase in traffic. That is not accurate. They said that we asked for the Clomar, and if they got the Clomar, then we should be satisfied. We did not ask for the Clomar. They didn't notify us within the time associated. Again, my property, our 11 acres, my husband and I own, butts up right to this property. We were not notified within the 30 days prior. And so those are my 6 points that Lexi had mentioned that are not accurate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let me go back to the applicant then for any final word before I go ahead and close the hearing. Does the applicant want to make any final statement?
No, thanks, Mr. Cassidy.
All right.
Appreciate your time.
All right, well, thank you all for your participation tonight. At this point, I hereby close the public hearing on the remand of case C9-2120, Casita Village at La Mariposa, Houghton Road. Everybody have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.